Hey everyone, welcome to Becca's True Crime Corner. I'm Becca, and if you are a true crime addict like me, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I do missing persons cases, unsolved, solved, a little bit of everything, but I've always got true crime here on this channel for you. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the family. And let's hop into today's case. The case I'm covering today is the Springfield 3. And it is a pretty well-known case, but it is very old, so I'm sure that there are plenty of people who haven't heard about it or just don't know a whole lot of information on it. I heard about this case years ago, and it's always just sat with me because it's crazy. And as I dived into the case, it just got even more mind-blowing to me and crazy. So we're going to talk about this case today, all of its theories and what exactly happened the day of and what I think at the end. So let's hop into it. The first person we're going to talk about today is Stacey McCall. She was 18 years old and she was described as funny, goofy, and spacey. Her mom actually mentioned in an interview that they called her Spacey Stacy because she was such a space cadet, but she also described her as being loving and caring and the type of person who would give the shirt off their back for somebody. Suzie Streeter was 19 years old. She was best friends with her mom and she was one of Stacy's good friends. They grew up together and she wanted to be a hairdresser just like her mom because they were that close. She really looked up to her and admired her and they were basically best friends. Suzie was described as being outgoing, fun, always happy. She was a creature of habit. Some people described her as being an old soul. She was very popular and she was attracted to the bad boys. Sherill Levitt, who is Suzie's mother, was 47 years old. She is a hairdresser. Like I said before, Suzie wanted to be just like her and be a hairdresser as well. And from what they said, she was very good at her job. She was a great hairdresser. She was friendly, but she was also fierce. At the time, she was going through a divorce and she had just currently bought her own home by herself that her and Suzie lived in. She bought this home because she knew it needed some love and she wanted to fix it up. It was going to be her little fixer-upper and her and Suzie were going to live there and just work on making it their home. June 6, 1992 in Springfield, Missouri, where all of the girls resided. The two girls were graduating from high school that day at Kickapoo High School. The ceremony was at 4 p.m. and after the graduation, they headed out to dinner with their families. The school was actually holding a locked-in party that night, but they had to sign a waiver that said no alcohol, no drugs, none of that. And once they were locked in, they could not leave. And the girls decided that that wasn't really their style. They didn't really want to do that. So they went to a different grad party instead. At this time, Sherill goes home and she decides to start working on a dresser that she's actually been fixing up. And she's going to just be painting it tonight and hanging out. The next morning, the girls were planning on going to a water park, which was about an hour away in Branson, Missouri. They had decided to rent a hotel room that night and stay there so that they didn't have to make that hour-long drive early in the morning and they could just get up and go to the water park. But for whatever reason, that night, the girls decided that they did not want to leave and that they would just wait until the next morning to go to the park. They actually called Stacy's mom that night at 10:30 p.m. to let her know that they were going to be staying in town instead of going to the hotel and that they were going to stay at another friend's house, Janelle's. And when they called Stacy's mom was actually really relieved. She did not want them to go stay in a hotel room somewhere else an hour away. She felt more relieved with them staying in town and felt like she would be safer. So to her, it was kind of a peace of mind and she was like, okay, I'll talk to you in the morning. When Suzie and Stacy got to Janelle's house, Janelle actually had a ton of family in town and they pretty much were taking up every nook and cranny for, you know, graduation. Family came in, wanted to see Janelle graduate. So they were taking up pretty much the whole house and all of the beds, and there were like makeshift beds on the floor that Janelle's mother had made for the girls. But Suzie and Stacy decided they wanted to go back to Suzie's house because Suzie had just gotten a brand new waterbed for graduation and she said there's plenty of room there. Let's go lay in my comfortable bed and not on the floor. So let's just go to my house. We'll see you in the morning, Janelle, whenever we're ready to go to the water park. The girls ended up leaving around 2 a.m. and returned to Susie's home around 2:15. The next morning, Janelle starts calling the house around 9 a.m. to see if the girls are ready to leave and go to the water park, because Janelle's going as well. She was another one of their good friends, and she was calling, but nobody was answering. At that point, after a little while of calling, Janelle and her boyfriend decide, you know what, we're just gonna go over there and we're gonna go and check on them and just stop by and see what's going on. She at first was like, maybe they left without us. Who knows what happened? Maybe they already left. So when she went over to Suzie and Cheryl's house, she immediately noticed that all 3 girls' cars were in the driveway. And that was suspicious because they're not answering the phone and nobody can get in touch with them. All of their cars are here, but she didn't think too much of it because she thought maybe they're just sleeping. Maybe they slept in, they slept through their alarm clock. So they walk up to the door and immediately they notice that there is broken glass on the steps and like the landing of the front door step. And it came from a light on the porch, but the light bulb itself was not broken, just the like outside globe was. And immediately Janelle's boyfriend's like, I'm gonna pick this up. They know how Sherill is. Like I said before, she's fierce, you know? They're probably like, we're gonna pick this up for her. We know she's gonna be annoyed and mad that it's broken. So he grabbed a broom and he started sweeping it up. After Janelle knocks for a little bit and nobody answers, she decides that she's just gonna go inside. The door's unlocked, so she went ahead and went inside, assuming that everybody was just still sleeping inside. But when she walked in the door and she's calling everybody's name, no one is answering. As they're walking around and they're peeking in everybody's bedrooms, they're noticing that Cheryl's room and Susie's room look like their beds were slept in. In the bathroom, Janelle notices that it looks like the girls washed their face before bed, took off all their jewelry, and probably just got ready for bed the night before. Suzie and Sherill had a small dog who was at the home, and Cinnamon was the dog's name. Cinnamon was acting really weird and just wanted to be held. It was kind of being skittish. And Janelle noticed right away that this was not normal behavior for that dog. Another thing that was noticed by Janelle was that Cheryl's cigarettes were sitting on the table with her lighter. And it was well known that Sherill was a chain smoker. I mean, this was in '92. She smoked in her house. She smoked all the time. I mean, she was known to walk from, if she walked from one room to the other, she had a cigarette in hand. Like, she did not go anywhere without her cigarettes. And the fact that they were sitting on the table with her lighter was weird to her. Of course, because Janelle is, 18 years old, her assumption is, well, maybe they did just leave and go to the water park without us. It all kind of seemed suspicious to her, and she was a little worried about it, but at the same time, she was trying to rationalize it in her head, as all of us do when we're in a weird situation like that. Like, I'm sure it's fine. They probably just went to the water park. I'm sure they're fine. So she didn't think too much of it. As they go to leave though, Janelle hears the phone ring and she decides to answer it. The call was very brief. They never said who they were, and the only things that they were saying was very crude, sexual, intimate things. And it was never revealed exactly what they were saying, but just that it was sexual, crude, intimate things. Janelle immediately hung up the phone and they called back. She was upset by this and thrown off and confused, but at the same time, she just thought it was a prank call. That same morning, Stacy's mom, Janice, calls Janelle's house because she thought that they were staying at Janelle's because the last time they spoke to Stacy's mother, that was the plan. And they never told her that they were actually going to Susie's and Cheryl's house. She was told by Janelle that she had not stayed at Janelle's house. They decided to go to Susie's and Cheryl's. And her mom at first was annoyed with this just because she was like, she didn't call me, she didn't tell me, but she wasn't sweating it too much. Janice also did not know Susie's phone number because they had just moved and they just didn't have the information yet. And of course, like I said, this was in '92. This was before cell phones. So Nobody really had an easy way of getting in touch with anybody, so she kind of just waited it out for the day and waited to hear from her daughter. But after not hearing from her for most of the day, she decides that she's going to find Susie's address and she's gonna go head over there and just see what's going on. When she walks up, the door is unlocked, so she kind of just welcomes her way in and calls out everybody's names. She immediately notices nobody's in the house, but she does see Stacy's clothes folded neatly on the floor, and the only thing missing is a t-shirt and a pair of underwear. She also mentioned when she was in the house that the TV was on and it was fuzzy. She also noticed that all three women's purses were lined next to each other and like perfectly lined up, almost like you would drop them down there to get ready for the next morning to leave, to just grab your bags and go. She then decides to listen to the answer machine to see if she can get any clues as to where her daughter is and what's going on. She said that there was a weird message on the answer machine from a man. It was described to be a similar message as to the phone call previously with Janelle. At this point, it's been almost all day. It's the end of the day. She hasn't heard from her daughter. She doesn't know what's going on. Sherill and Suzie are also missing and she's just confused. She decides to call the police and put in a missing persons report. After calling the police and having them fill out a missing person report, Janice said that they had said to come the next morning and meet with them and to try and bring dental records. She said in that moment she knew that this wasn't going to be good and that their first thought was not good. Her words were, she knows what they're suggesting. Immediately, Janice goes into action and she gets a photo of each girl and she starts making missing persons posters and goes around town asking people to put them in their windows and asking anybody if they've seen the girls. Police conclude that somewhere between 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. something must have happened to them. Unfortunately, there were so many people at the scene and contaminating it, touching things, sweeping up messes and cleaning up messes, and that's just a mess for the police and so much contamination. I had actually read in a couple articles, and Stacy's mom said this in an interview, that people were actually, well, family members were coming into the house and cleaning up, emptying out ashtrays, cleaning the dishes in the sink, because at the time they weren't super concerned. They thought they were gonna come back. They thought they were gonna be home. So they were just doing something nice and cleaning up for them while they were waiting for them to come home or waiting to hear something from them. Also, those messages on the machine somehow got deleted. Stacy's mom, in the frantic of everything, somehow deleted those messages from the answer machine, although the police had said time and time again that they do not think that those prank calls had anything to do with their disappearance. These three women literally just vanished off the face of the earth and nobody could find anything. Nobody could find any clues. There really was nothing there. And it's just like they completely disappeared. A year later, in August 1993, the police get a search warrant to search a local Webster area in Missouri. This was some farmland out in the middle of nowhere basically, and they had gotten a tip from somebody saying that there was a drunk guy at a party talking about how he buried them in this farmland. But some of the things that this person was saying, the tipster was saying, the media and nobody knew, only the police knew. So they went ahead and got a search warrant and went and searched the property. And of course, the search warrant for that property is sealed, so you cannot look up to see what it was that caused them to go out and search the property. There is no information on why, what was said. All they've said is that somebody had given a tip that a drunk friend was talking about how they murdered the girls and abducted them. Throughout the years, there has been plenty of suspects in this case, one of which was Cheryl's son and Susie's brother, Bart. Bart is 9 years older than Suzie, and he actually moved out of the house when he was 17 years old because him and his mother just bumped heads and they didn't get along. He had said in an interview that at the time he did have some drinking issues and she didn't want him drinking and he wanted to keep drinking. So instead of staying in the house and constantly fighting with her over it, he decided at 17 that he would just go on his own way. 10 years later though, he had a really tough breakup and decided to move back to town. And he asked Suzie if she wanted to get an apartment with him when she was 18 years old. Unfortunately, at this time, he was still heavily drinking. One night, Suzie comes home late and her brother is blasting music. He's drunk, he's being loud, and she asked him to quiet down, turn down the music. They got into a huge fight where they were screaming at each other and throwing things. It got very heated, and Suzie decided that she was going to move back in with her mother, and at that time, they both decided to completely cut Bart off. This was about 3 months before their disappearance. And of course, 3 months later, when they disappear, he gets a phone call from the police station to come down and be questioned. Of course, immediately he is a suspect and they do a polygraph, which he passes. He said the night that they disappeared, he was at a bar, he got really intoxicated, came home to his girlfriend and fell asleep. His girlfriend also confirmed his alibi and that he was home all night with her. A neighbor as well saw him that night and was able to also back that alibi. He's always been super cooperative with the police, and I actually watched a special that they did on this on the ID channel. It's called Disappeared. It's quite a few years older. Not that there's a lot of information that is new after that, but it is quite a few years older, and I watched that and he is actually on that episode, and you can just tell by looking at him that he is heartbroken that things ended the way they did, because not only did they disappear and he doesn't know what happened to his mom and his sister, but they were having a falling out because he was an alcoholic, and he knows that. He's aware of his wrongdoings. He was aware of it at the time, but if you've ever known an addict, it's really hard to come out of that, and it's really hard to treat the people you love well when you're an addict. And I think when all of that happened and they disappeared, it was just incredibly heartbreaking to him to know that they left on the terms they did. And he got very emotional during the interview, and it broke my heart for him, I'm not gonna lie. I don't think he has anything to do with this. He doesn't seem vengeful or hateful or anything. Like I said, he was an addict. He knows he was wrong for treating his family the way he did, and he always felt, because he was young at the time, he always felt that eventually they would patch it up and things would be back to normal. And you know, you fight with your family, you don't talk to them for a little bit, you think it's going to go back to normal and it's going to be fine, and then they disappear. Nobody ever anticipates that. It was very well known in this case that Suzie dated bad boys. Like I said earlier, she just liked the bad boys. She was fun, she was spontaneous, and she enjoyed the wild side a little bit. Unfortunately, she was known to have questionable relationships with questionable people. One of her exes, Dustin Rekla, they had broken up a few months before the disappearance. Dustin was actually involved in a vandalism at a local cemetery, which was what caused the breakup. One night, Dustin and his friend decided to vandalize a mausoleum, and they took skulls and put them in a tree at a park, which some kids noticed the next morning. Within a couple of days, there were tips coming in that there were some young men who were trying to pawn gold teeth at a local pawn shop. It was later found that these gold teeth came from the skulls that were vandalized at the mausoleum. Fortunately though, the pawn shop takes driver's license whenever they take something like that, and they had exactly who it was who tried to pawn the teeth. And the person who pawned them was Michael Clay, who was Suzie's ex-boyfriend's good friend. When police went to his home, they had found some weird things that were like a circle poster, candles, animal skulls, and it kind of just felt kind of satanic to them. He unfortunately wasn't home that day, so they come back a day later when he was home, and all of those things were gone or put away. Suzie actually gave a statement to police that would help convict them of this crime, and she was due to be in court for September of '92. Michael, of course, was brought in for questioning on Suzie and Sherill and Stacy's disappearance, and in a news interview, it was stated that he said, "I wish those bitches were dead." He later stated that he said that because he didn't like the investigators who were questioning them. I'm not sure why you don't like the investigators and why you would implicate yourself in a situation like that just because you don't like them, but okay. The night they went missing, Dustin was supposedly at a rock concert and afterwards attended a party. And Michael had a very similar alibi, and unfortunately for them, neither one of these are completely rock solid, so it's still up in the air. They end up pleading guilty for the burglary charges and end up on probation. The morning the three women disappeared, there was a woman sitting on her front porch around 6:30 a.m. and 7 a.m. and she was about a mile away from Suzie and Sherill's house. She said while she was sitting on her porch, a green van pulled into her driveway and it looked like Suzie driving the van, and it looked like she'd been crying a lot. She said she heard a man in the back seat say to Suzie when they pulled in the driveway, "Don't do anything stupid, just back out, turn around, and get us out of here." The woman said it took her so long to come forward because she had heard about the disappearances, but she didn't know what they looked like. And a couple weeks later, she saw a poster, and when she saw the poster, she noticed that it looked like Suzie was the driver. The van was described as a 1964 to 1970 Dodge panel van. It was described to be a celery color. And police do believe that this is a solid lead. The police went so far as to take a van that looked identical to it and have it painted the color that she said it was, have it sitting outside of the police station with a sign in it that said, "Please call with any information." Unfortunately though, nothing comes from this. Another suspect in this case is Stephen Garrison, who is currently serving time in prison for raping a woman and sodomizing her. He is the one who came forward and had the tip about his friend and had information that nobody knew. And because he had this information, police have always looked at him as a suspect or a potential suspect because he just knew information that nobody else knows. Throughout the period of time, many tips have came in and they still get tips to this day. And one of the tips that they got through the tip line was that the women were buried underneath the Cox Hospital parking garage. And in 2007, a reporter had asked an expert to come out and do a sonogram of the concrete to see what was underneath it. It's called ground penetrating radar. When they did this, there was actually 3 anomalies that he found in the garage. He also stated that they are the type of anomalies you would see in a gravesite. Unfortunately though, the police do not feel that this is enough for them to dig up the garage. It would cost them a ton of money and resources to do a job like that. And to them, it's just not an assurance that there is something underneath there. And just one random tip that has no backing to it is not enough for them to do that. The garage was also built a year after the 3 women went missing, and they feel like if they were building a garage, they're digging up ground, they're digging up soil, and that their bodies would have been discovered when they were actually building this garage. But then of course, other people say, if you know the garage is being built, wouldn't that be a perfect spot to hide a body before they lay the concrete? And then they lay the concrete and the bodies are underneath it. The number 1 suspect to date is a tip that came in from a victim's brother out of Florida. The man's name that he gave was Robert Cox. And to just give a little backstory on Robert Cox and his crimes and what happened to this victim's sister. December 30th, 1978, Sharon Zellers, who was 19 years old, was leaving her job at Disney World in Florida at 10 p.m. She then was abducted from her car after stopping at a grocery store on her way home from work. That same night, Robert Cox shows up at his hotel room where his family is, and he is profusely bleeding. So his mother calls security to have them call an ambulance. He then goes to the hospital and has a nurse see him because half of his tongue has been bitten off. Robert Cox was 19 years old, serving in the military at the time, and he was actually on vacation in Florida with his family. He had told his family that he had gotten into a bar fight and bit his tongue during the fight. Unfortunately for him, the nurse said that that was not possible because the bite that he had on his tongue was shown for the teeth to be facing outwards instead of inwards. So basically he couldn't have, the pattern on his tongue from the bite, he couldn't have bit his own tongue. And it was later stated that 2 security guys from the bar came forward and said that fight absolutely did not happen. 6 days after Sharon went missing, her body was found in a sewage pumping area, which ironically was only 100 yards from Robert Cox's hotel. She was badly beaten. Her car was found not far from there, and in the car there was hair that was similar to Robert Cox's. There was blood in the car that was his blood type, and there was a boot imprint by her body, which were the same boots as the military style boots that he wore. He was sentenced to Florida's death row for the murder of Sharon Zeller. Unfortunately though, he appealed, and 18 months later he was released for insufficient amount of evidence. And then in 1985, he went on to abduct 2 women in California. 2 separate times. 2 separate times. Not 2 women at the same time. 2 women, 2 separate times in California. And this was in 1985. He somehow was paroled not long afterwards and moved to Springfield, Missouri, where he was from and where his parents lived. He managed to land a job at the same car dealership that Stacy's father worked at. Stacy was known to frequent there. She would go and have lunch with her dad, and she would stop in and visit him. Of course, once the police noticed this, he became an immediate suspect and they went and questioned him. Unfortunately though, Robert said that he had an alibi, that he was with his girlfriend all night, and then they woke up and went to church the next morning. And she backed this alibi. Although years later, she came forward and said that she has no idea where he was that night and that they didn't go to church the next morning. And as far as where Robert is now, he is serving a life sentence in a Texas jail for robbing a 15-year-old girl in Decatur, Texas. Unfortunately though, he is up for parole in the year 2025. While he has been in the Texas prison though, reporters have gone to him and talked to him to see if he had any information on the disappearance of the Springfield 3. And when they went and talked to him, he gave details like he knows what happened to the 3 women and he knows where their bodies are buried. But then he quickly says he refuses to talk about it or say anything further until his mother is dead. Throughout the years, there have been a ton of tips that have came out, and there have been a ton of convicts who want to strike deals. So they have come forward and tried to give new information to try and strike a deal, but unfortunately for them, none of it has been new and the police already knew about it. Although in the early 2000s, there were a few tips that had police digging up certain areas to check to see if they could find the girls. And once again, this is still an open case, so it hasn't been revealed as to what the tips were or anything like that, but that was all that they said. And once again, unfortunately in this case, it has been quiet the past decade and there hasn't been any real sufficient tips that have came in recently to lead to any more answers. This case is literally just so mind-blowing. The fact that 3 women just vanished, completely disappeared. There have been other theories that have talked about maybe sex trafficking, and I know that it wasn't as spoken about back in '92, but the thing is it's always been a thing. It's always been here. It's always been happening. We're just talking more about it. Other people have speculated that that might not be it because Sherill was a little bit too old for sex trafficking, one would think. But the other 2 girls weren't. The other thing is, if it were sex trafficking, I would think that this would have been completely thought out and totally planned. And the fact that the girls were even home that night was completely unplanned. They weren't even supposed to be there. That's the weird part. One of the things that I had thought of was, what if something was happening to Sherill and the girls came home in the midst of this happening? But then again, everything looks like they slept in their bed. It looks like they got ready for bed. I mean, I guess they could have came home and she could have been in another room in harm's way and they might not have known and started getting ready for bed. And then of course they're there, they're witnesses, and something has to be done, right? The other thought is, I guess maybe it could be sex trafficking. Really, I mean, even if it wasn't planned, even if it was somewhat planned, unfortunately, they're now getting 3 women instead of just 1, or instead of just 2. So I don't think that if that was a plan and that's what somebody was after and doing, I don't think 1 more person being there or 2 more people being there would have deterred the plan any. And as far as that, I mean, I really just don't know. I find it really hard to understand how 3 women could be taken by 1 person. A part of me feels like there has to be more people involved. There just has to be. It can't just be 1 person. And I don't know. Maybe it could be. Maybe they could have had a gun. Maybe they could have had a weapon that scared them enough. But I think it would be really hard to wrangle 3 women. And then of course, I guess there's the thought too that you wouldn't want to leave a man behind. So if something were to happen, would you run away from your loved ones and just leave them to hopefully get them help? I don't know. I don't know. So it's kind of confusing to think, was it just 1 person or was it multiple people? I would think too that Suzie's ex-boyfriend maybe didn't have anything to do with this. I don't think that they were facing a whole bunch of time, if they were even facing time. I don't think that they were too concerned about it. I mean, she was technically snitching, so maybe that was the problem. I'm not taking anybody out of the equation. Let's just put it that way. I'm not taking anybody out of the equation. I am not saying that they weren't involved. I mean, people have murdered for way less than that. So there is a possibility that they could have been involved. I think they are viable suspects and the door maybe should never be closed on them until we have some real solid answers. But my theory, Robert Cox. He was experienced. He knew what he was doing. He was in the area. He had crossed paths with Stacey. I mean, I don't find that as a coincidence. You don't cross paths with a serial killer. And Stacey was beautiful. I mean, she was a local model. She was breathtaking when you looked at her. So I definitely think that she could have crossed paths and he could have been stalking her. He could have been following her. And that night she happened to be at a home with just women, just 2 other small women. How easy would that be for him to abduct all of them? And now he gets 3 instead of 1. I just think that he is the more viable suspect. He's openly admitted that he had part in it or that he knows something. And I think he was experienced enough to be able to take 3 women at once. He knew what he was doing. Although whether or not we'll ever get answers from him, who knows? It's absolutely frustrating too that he was even paroled after kidnapping 2 women and that he was able to possibly do this. It's frustrating that he was was able to appeal for the murder in Florida. It's just so sad because if he is the person who did this and if he is the person responsible for their disappearances, this could have been prevented. If he served on death row, his life sentence, whatever. If he was in prison for a while in California, if he was serving his death row sentence in Florida, this would have never happened if he's the one who's responsible for it. So it's just upsetting to think that there are so many things that could have stopped this from happening if it were him that didn't, and it costed even more lives in the process. All right, guys, let me know in the comments down below what your theories are. Of course, keep it respectful as always. Remember that this is a family. This is a loved one. Stacey's mother is still alive and she's always talking about this case to bring, focus to it. And keep in mind that you never know, one of their family members could see this video or see the comments. So always be respectful and kind. This is a loved one. This could be your family member. This could be my family member. So please always be nice and respectful and kind in the comments. But do tell me, what are your theories? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, let me know if you have any requests for any cases, and I will see you guys later. Bye.